Welcome to a century of cinema. Today I will be exploring my favourite films of 1964. First up, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, directed by Stanley Kubrick. In this comedy about nuclear Armageddon, yes, you heard correct, Peter Sellers pulls triple duty in the roles of RAF Exchange Officer Captain Lionel Mandrake, US President Merkin Muffley, and the titular Dr. Strangelove, a not entirely former Nazi scientist, now advisor to the president. It begins with Sterling Hayden's General Jack D. Ripper, the names in this movie, incredible, giving the order for an all-out nuclear assault on the Soviet Union. We then follow three aspects of the crisis. Mandrake trying to deal with Ripper, one of the bombers piloted by Slim Pickens as Major Kong, and the war room with President Muffley, Dr. Strangelove, and George C. Scott as the ridiculously gung-ho General Buck Turgidson. Loosely based on the novel Red Alert by Peter George, with a screenplay by George Kubrick and Terry Southern, it is easily one of the funniest and smartest scripts of the era, packed with clever commentary and excellent lines.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
And the film is blessed with gorgeous black and white cinematography by Gilbert Taylor and some note-perfect performances. George C. Scott as Turgidson wanted to play it completely straight, but Kubrick convinced him to do some more outlandish takes, which he always intended to use in the final film. And it turned out great because Scott is hilarious. Sterling Hayden's Ripper is the perfect portrait of American patriotism gone mad. Keenan Wynn pops in for a brief role as Colonel Bat Guano, probably, apart from possibly Strangelove himself, the funniest role in the entire film, obsessed with so-called preverts. But of course, Peter Sellers is the real standout here. Brilliant in all three roles, ever so proper and British as Mandrake, even when he is clearly at the end of his tether. As Muffley, he plays it totally straight, which perfectly counterbalances Scott's Turgidson. But it is as Dr. Strangelove, the smallest role he plays in the movie, that he really shines. Creepy and clearly a Nazi to his core, exemplified by his errant arm prone to Nazi salutes and his tendency to let out an occasional Mein Führer, it's a memorable performance to say the least. So, Dr. Strangelove is my choice for Best Screenplay for Kubrick, George and Southern, and Best Actor for the inimitable Peter Sellers. Alfred Hitchcock's Marnie stars Tippi Hedren in the title role, her second and final film with Hitchcock. Actually, Marnie represents a few finals. This would be his last film with a Bernard Herrmann score, the last time he worked with cinematographer Robert Burks, and the last Hitchcock film I would rank among my favourites. The character of Marnie is an habitual thief and pathological liar. She has been going from job to job, robbing her employers and changing her identity. She also cannot stand to be touched by men and has a crippling fear of the colour red. When her latest job introduces her to Mark Rutland, played by Sean Connery at the peak of his run as James Bond, he is intrigued by and attracted to her. But he also suspects her, since he was a client of her former company. So when she robs his company, he tracks her down and essentially makes her marry him, which is when he finds out about her aversion to sex, which he is initially sensitive to. After a confronting scene where Mark actually rapes Marnie, he sets about discovering the root of Marnie's trauma. Tippi Hedren acts out of her skin as Marnie, in only her second major film role, and it is a performance which has been largely unsung throughout the years, which boggles the mind. Marnie is such a demanding role, and Hedren wrangles it with apparent ease and grace, even though shooting was quite an ordeal in itself, but that's another story. There are times when you can practically see her playing three people at once. The role Marnie is playing at the office, the calculating thief beneath, and the inner, traumatized little girl. And when the layers are peeled away to reveal the raw nerve that is the real Marnie, Hedren is nothing short of spectacular. Connery also has a difficult task playing Mark, because he has to muster all of his considerable charm and charisma in order to allow the audience, even more so a modern one, to stay with the character after that powerful rape scene, which is some vintage Hitchcock, both in its excellence and perverted nature. And Hedren's blank stare speaks volumes. The film is also stunningly shot by Burks and has a very solid supporting cast, particularly Diane Baker as the scheming, jealous Lil, the sister of Mark's dead wife, and Louise Latham as Marnie's mother. There's a complicated relationship, and she does a great job with it. Oh, and look, there's Alfred. Alan Napier as Mark's father. But what puts Marnie on this list is undoubtedly the performance of Tippi Hedren, my best actress choice, and the direction of the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. For the 11th and final time, my choice for best director.
Sex.
Masculine, feminine, Adam and Eve, Jack and Jill. I'll slap your filthy face if you come near me again, Jack.
Deaf.
Me. Oh, listen, Mark.
Needles.
Pins.
Black.
White.
Red.
White. White. White!
Finally, it's the first movie featuring the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night. It is essentially a fictionalized day in the life of the Beatles, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, who must evade hordes of screaming fans, wrangle Paul's mischievous grandfather, played by Wilfred Bramble, and do a TV performance. One review at the time called A Hard Day's Night the Citizen Kane of jukebox musicals, and it is hard to argue because it is head and shoulders above every other rock pop star vehicle ever made, and laid the blueprint for how to do it right. Of course, the film had a head start, because its stars had such natural wit and charm. Each gets their chance to shine, but Ringo probably gets the biggest chance to spread his wings while off on a little solo adventure. Although it's John that gets most of the laughs. He gets all the best lines, probably because he is so naturally funny. George gets a few funny moments too, especially when dealing with a trend-obsessed ad exec. Paul is basically lumbered with the straight man role. A Hard Day's Night was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Original Screenplay for Alan Owen, who perfectly captured the essence of the Beatles' public personas, and George Martin's score, largely composed of reworkings of Beatles songs. And speaking of the songs, in this type of movie, they are of paramount importance. But it's the freaking Beatles, so there's no problem there. Along with the massive hit that is the title track, there are such classics as I Should Have Known Better, Can't Buy Me Love, and She Loves You, as well as my favourites, the beautiful ballad If I Fell, and the irresistibly foot-tapping Tell Me Why.
Tell me why you cried and why you lied to me.
So, endearing cast, excellent screenplay, top-notch music, snappy direction by Richard Lester, and oh yeah, it's shot pretty damn well too, by Dr. Strangelove's Gilbert Taylor. This is one of the movies I've watched the most in my lifetime, and I always get a kick out of it. It would be good enough for either just the Beatles the band, or just the Beatles the individuals, but it's excellent on both counts. And I am a ride or die, die-hard, hardcore Beatles fan, so A Hard Day's Night is my best picture of 1964. Join me next time on A Century of Cinema, when I will be discussing my favourite films of 1965. Now go watch a movie.